I didn't think much of it at the time. That's kind of the problem with humans. We do things first, then wonder later why the universe starts acting weird about it. I was coming off a double shift, pockets light, patience lighter, carrying a container of protein stew that was meant to last me 3 days if I stretched it. I didn't stretch it. I never do. That's when I saw her crouch near the transit pylons, tail wrapped tight, ears low, eyes tracking every passerby like they might suddenly turn into food. She didn't look dangerous. She looked empty. Adult, clearly, lean muscle, worn gear, the posture of someone who'd survived too much to be a kid. When she spoke, her voice was steady but tired, and she said she was weak. Not injured. Not sick. Weak. From lack of protein, she added, like it was an embarrassing confession. I offered her food before I asked her name. Human habit. You see a problem, you try to fix it. She hesitated, sniffed the air, then looked at the container like it might bite back. I told her it was stew. Thick. Hot. Real portions. Her ears twitched at that word. Portions. She asked how much was in it. I said enough. That was apparently the wrong answer, because she stared at me like I'd just claimed to own a moon. I clarified, enough to feel full. Her tail froze. She asked if I meant temporarily or properly. I said properly, because who feeds someone temporarily? She took the container with both hands like it was fragile, then sat right there and started eating. I've fed a lot of people. Refugees, drifters, coworkers who forgot their ration cards. Nobody reacts like that. She slowed down halfway through, eyes unfocused, breathing deep, like her body was recalibrating. She kept making these small noises under her breath, appreciative sounds that would have meant nothing if I hadn't noticed how carefully she was watching my hands when I offered bread. She said I had good control? I thought she meant I hadn't spilled. She said my portions were generous. I said stew's cheap if you know where to shop. She said I must have strong hands to prepare food like that. I told her it was mostly chopping and patience. She smiled in a way that suggested we were not having the same conversation. She asked how often I fed others. I said whenever I could. She asked if I lived alone. I said yes. She asked if I preferred it that way. I shrugged. She nodded like she was filing paperwork. When she finished, she leaned back, visibly fuller, tail loose, posture open, and said she hadn't felt that satisfied in a long time. I told her I was glad it helped. She thanked me with both hands on my wrist, claws gentle, eyes steady. Then she left, glancing back once like she'd forgotten something important but decided it could wait. I went home thinking I'd done a good thing. I reheated what was left, told myself it was still 2 days' worth if I wasn't picky, and slept hard. The next few days were normal. Too normal. Work, commute, bland conversations about supply chains and weather satellites. I didn't expect her to come back. People usually don't. Kindness is often a one-way transaction in the galaxy. That's why it works. On the 4th day, there was a knock on my door. Confident. Precise. Like whoever was on the other side knew I'd answer. She stood there looking different. Healthier. Filled out in ways that suggested recovery, not indulgence. Clean gear. Brighter eyes. She smiled like she'd rehearsed it. Then she stepped aside, and that's when I noticed the other Vulpine. Taller. Older. Built like she'd never missed a meal in her life and made sure everyone else knew it. Her gaze swept over me the way inspectors look at structural supports. Assessing load-bearing qualities. The daughter said my name like it meant something official. The older one nodded once, sharp and approving, and said she'd been eager to meet the provider. I corrected her. I wasn't a provider. I just fed her daughter. Once. Maybe twice if you counted the bread. The older Vulpine's ears lifted. She asked if I was sure. She explained calmly that feeding an adult Vulpine until she was satisfied was not a casual gesture. It was an intention. She said sharing meals indicated willingness to share space, routine, responsibility. I laughed, because the alternative was panic. I told her it was just dinner. She said that was what made it serious. Anyone could ration. Only humans fed like they expected nothing back. She stepped inside without asking, sniffed the air, and commented that the environment was modest but adequate. She asked where I prepared my food. I pointed to the kitchenette. She ran a claw along the counter and remarked that I must be consistent to maintain such output in a small space. I said I cleaned as I went. She smiled like that was impressive. The daughter hovered near the door, ears warm with embarrassment, tail flicking whenever her mother spoke. The older one asked how often I worked late. I said most nights. She nodded and said stamina mattered in long-term arrangements. I tried to explain cultural differences. I tried to say there had been no contract. She told me there had been, whether I'd known it or not. Vulpine hospitality law recognized intent through action, not words. Feeding someone properly was an act of claiming responsibility. Feeding them again was confirmation. I asked what feeding them a third time meant. She said we'd discuss that later. My throat went dry. She assured me there was no danger. They weren't here to take anything. They were here because my actions had demonstrated reliability, generosity, and a willingness to provide without coercion. Qualities in short supply. The daughter finally spoke up and said I made good stew. The way she said it made her mother chuckle. I offered water because it was the only neutral thing left. The older one accepted and noted my reflexes were quick. I told her it was just practice. She said practice showed dedication. I realized then that everything I did was being filtered through a lens I didn't own. Every human habit inflated into something larger. I'd fed a hungry stranger, and somehow that had turned into an invitation I didn't remember sending. When they said they'd be staying, at least for now, I didn't argue. Humans rarely do when faced with confident aliens and their own good intentions. I told myself it would sort itself out. It always does. That's another human flaw. We trust tomorrow to clean up what kindness started today. They didn't unpack right away. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't a visit, it was an evaluation. The older Vulpine moved through my apartment with the confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. She didn't touch much, just looked, measuring distances, airflow, storage, the way my kitchen counter lined up with the sink. She commented that my space was compact but efficient, which somehow sounded like a compliment and a warning at the same time. The daughter stayed close to me, not out of fear, but like proximity itself meant something. I stood there holding an empty water glass, wondering how feeding one person soup had turned into a household inspection. The older one introduced herself properly then, name long and sharp, full of honorifics that didn't translate cleanly. She told me I could call her Mother, for simplicity. I said that felt presumptuous. She said so did feeding her daughter until she was satisfied. We stared at each other, both convinced the other had missed something obvious. She explained the Vulpine hospitality contract in more detail, using words like implicit consent and demonstrated capacity. Apparently, in their culture, generosity wasn't casual. It was directional. You didn't give without meaning to keep giving. I told her humans gave all the time without expecting permanence. She paused, ears angling forward, and said that was exactly why humans were considered dangerous. She asked how many meals I prepared in a cycle. I told her I cooked in bulk because it saved time. She nodded and said efficiency suggested experience. She asked if I preferred working alone or supporting others. I said I liked knowing everyone was fed. She wrote something down on a small slate. I asked what she was documenting. She said compatibility indicators. The daughter made a small sound like she wanted to crawl into the floor. I tried to laugh it off, but the older one was relentless in her calm. She asked about my income stability, my sleep patterns, my tolerance for shared space. Every answer I gave seemed to reinforce her conclusions, not challenge them. When I said I wasn't prepared for long-term guests, she agreed. She said no one ever was the first time. She clarified that, living together, didn't mean what I thought it did. It meant shared routines, mutual care, and acknowledgement of contribution. She emphasized that contribution didn't have to be symmetrical. Some provided resources. Some provided presence. Some provided oversight. I didn't like the way she looked at my kitchen when she said, "Resources?" She asked how late I usually stayed up. I said it depended on the week. She smiled and said flexibility was valuable. The daughter finally interrupted, saying her mother was making it sound worse than it was. She said humans were supposed to be informal. I appreciated that until her mother replied that informality was often just confidence wearing comfortable clothes. She asked if I'd be cooking tonight. I said yes, because that was easier than saying no. The daughter's tail flicked once, quick and hopeful. The older one said she'd like to observe my preparation process. Observe. Not help. Observe. I told myself it was fine. It was just dinner. Again. Cooking with an audience changes things. Every movement felt exaggerated. The older one commented on my grip, the way I handled heat, how I tasted before serving. She said I had good instincts. She said instincts like that came from repetition. I said hunger teaches fast. She agreed and added that sustained hunger taught faster. The daughter hovered, offering small, unnecessary help, clearly trying to redirect the conversation. When I served the bowls, the older one watched closely, noting the portions. She said consistency was important. I asked if she wanted more. She said not yet, but appreciated the offer. They ate together, speaking softly in their own language, occasionally glancing at me. The daughter looked relaxed again, the way she had that first day, and that eased something in my chest I hadn't realized was tight. The older one finished last and leaned back, assessing. She said I maintained quality under pressure. I said it was just soup. She said soup revealed a lot about a person. She said it took patience to let things simmer properly. I said impatience ruined everything. She smiled like we'd finally agreed on something important. Afterward, she explained the living arrangement as if it were already approved. Temporary, she said, until obligations were fulfilled. I asked whose obligations. She said mine, primarily. That didn't help. She clarified that by feeding her daughter again, I'd reaffirmed my role. I pointed out I hadn't known that. She said ignorance didn't negate effect. I asked how long, temporary, was. She said until stability was achieved. I asked for a number. She said humans always wanted numbers when comfort couldn't be quantified. I tried to set boundaries. I said my schedule was irregular. She said they were adaptable. I said my space was limited. She said efficiency mattered more than size. I said I valued privacy. She said privacy was respected, but solitude was a choice, and choices had consequences. The daughter watched me with something like apology in her eyes. She said she hadn't known it would escalate like this. I believed her. That might have been another mistake. That night, after they settled in, on the couch, not my bed, because even I had limits, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar breathing patterns and wondering when my life had become a cultural case study. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it would resolve. I told myself I'd stop feeding people if this was the result. I knew, even then, that was a lie. Humans don't stop feeding the hungry. We just learn to cook bigger batches and hope the universe doesn't read too much into it. Thing that looked almost normal if you didn't listen too closely to the language being used. Mornings started earlier because the mother believed shared meals established rhythm, and rhythm established reliability. She treated my alarm clock like a suggestion rather than a rule. I'd stumble into the kitchen to find her already awake, tail perfectly still, watching me like I was late to my own assessment. She commented that I functioned well even when groggy. I said caffeine helped. She said stimulants explained a lot about human endurance. The daughter choked on her drink and refused to make eye contact. They developed opinions about my routines fast. How often I cooked. How much I cooked. How quickly I cleaned up afterward. The mother noted everything. She said consistency was attractive. I said it was just habit. She said habit was just discipline pretending to be casual. When I stayed up late finishing reports, she remarked on my stamina. When I slept in on my off day, she said recovery was important for sustained performance. Every mundane human behavior was translated into something heavier, like I was unknowingly narrating a very different story with my actions. The daughter was easier. She joked, teased, rolled her eyes whenever her mother praised me for something that clearly did not deserve praise. She apologized more than once for the phrasing, said Vulpine language wasn't designed to sound subtle in trade dialect. I told her it was fine. It wasn't, but it was funny enough that I let it slide. She helped with meals, which immediately became shared preparation, which the mother noted as a positive development. I said chopping vegetables together didn't mean anything. The mother said cooperation always meant something. Things got complicated outside the apartment. Neighbors started noticing. It's hard not to when two Vulpine refugees move in and talk loudly about how well they're being taken care of. One of them congratulated me in the hallway and asked how I managed my energy. I told him I slept when I could. He laughed like that wasn't what he meant. A building administrator stopped by for a routine check and left looking deeply uncomfortable after the mother thanked me for my continued support and nightly reliability. I stopped correcting people after the third misunderstanding. Correcting never helped. It just made things sound worse. The mother insisted on accompanying me to the market. She said observing my resource acquisition would give her a clearer picture of my long-term viability. I said it was just grocery shopping. She said nothing was ever just anything. She watched how I compared prices, how I chose fresh produce over packaged substitutes, how I bought extra without being prompted. She said humans plan for others instinctively. I said I just didn't like running out. She said foresight was a form of generosity. She asked how often I adjusted portions based on appetite. I said I eyeballed it. She nodded approvingly and said intuition mattered. Back home, she commented on my hands again. How steady they were. How comfortable I seemed with repetitive tasks. I told her years of manual work would do that. She said experience showed. The daughter groaned and told her mother to stop narrating. The mother replied that documentation was important. I realized then that, to her, I wasn't a person in the usual sense. I was a case study in accidental excellence. A species that did things without realizing how impressive they looked from the outside. The strangest part was how little I actually changed. I still cooked. Still cleaned. Still worked. Still complained about long hours and broken appliances. The difference was the audience. Every complaint was interpreted as resilience. Every shortcut was praised as efficiency. When I fixed a loose cabinet hinge, the mother said I maintained my environment proactively. I said I didn't like rattling noises. She said discomfort intolerance drove progress. I wondered how humans had ever survived first contact without causing entire civilizations to overthink us. Problems came up, as they always do. The heating unit failed one night, and the apartment dropped to an uncomfortable chill. I grabbed extra blankets and adjusted the vents. The mother watched silently, then said improvisation under stress was a valuable trait. I snapped that it was just problem solving. She replied that problem solving was the point. The daughter curled up under the blankets and muttered that humans were exhausting. I agreed with her for once. The more time passed, the clearer it became that the contract wasn't about ownership or obligation. It was about trust. They had been burned before, species that promised support and delivered control instead. Humans didn't promise. We just acted. That terrified them. It also attracted them. The mother admitted one evening, in a rare moment of blunt honesty, that humans confused the galaxy. We didn't posture. We didn't ritualize care. We fed people because they were hungry and expected the universe not to turn it into a binding declaration. I asked her if she ever considered that maybe the universe should change instead. She said change required examples. I asked if that meant me. She said it meant humans. All of us. Loud, messy, generous humans who couldn't stop ourselves from helping even when it complicated everything. The daughter smiled at that, soft and real, and said that was why she'd come back. Not because of the food. Because of how unremarkable I'd treated her hunger. By the end of the week, the apartment felt fuller but not crowded. Louder but warmer. I still tripped over tails in the hallway and still had to explain to coworkers that no, I wasn't part of some exotic arrangement, no matter what the rumors said. The mother still evaluated everything I did like it was a test I didn't remember signing up for. But there was laughter now. Real laughter. The kind that didn't need translating. I realized then that the problem wasn't that they'd moved in. The problem was that the galaxy had never been prepared for a species that treated survival like a shared chore instead of a transaction. And somehow, by doing nothing special at all, I'd become proof of that. The contract turned out to be shorter than I expected. That should have worried me more. The mother placed it on the table one morning like she was finally done circling the point. She said clarity was overdue. I said I agreed, even though my stomach tightened the moment I saw the seal. It wasn't ownership. It wasn't obligation in the way I feared. It was a record. A declaration that care had been given freely and accepted honestly. No dominance clauses. No exclusivity. No expectations beyond continued decency. I read it twice, then a third time slower, waiting for the trap. There wasn't one. That, apparently, was the human part. I asked what fulfillment meant in this context. The mother said stability. Safety. Shared routines until independence was restored. I asked whose independence. She said theirs. I didn't know why that surprised me, but it did. I'd assumed, without realizing it, that once something became official, it became permanent. She corrected that assumption with the precision of someone who'd watched too many species confuse possession with care. She said humans confused the galaxy because we fed people back to their feet instead of keeping them dependent. I told her we just didn't like watching people starve. She said exactly. The daughter leaned over my shoulder and pointed out the section about voluntary continuation. She said that part mattered. I asked if she planned to invoke it. She shrugged and said she liked the food and the quiet. Then she added that she liked being treated like an adult instead of a burden. The way she said it stripped the humor out of the room for a moment. The mother noticed and cleared her throat, saying growth required contrast. I signed the contract because at that point, it felt rude not to. Also because it changed almost nothing about what I was already doing. Life adjusted again, subtly this time. The evaluations stopped feeling like inspections and started feeling like conversations. The mother still commented on my habits, but now there was warmth under it. She teased me about my portion control, said humans had a dangerous habit of overcompensating when they cared. I told her hunger left a mark. She nodded like that explained more than I intended. The daughter took over more of the cooking, which she immediately reframed as sharing responsibility, just to watch her mother's ears twitch. I pretended not to notice how natural it felt. There were still misunderstandings. There always would be. A delivery courier congratulated me on my successful integration and handed me a pamphlet I didn't want. A coworker asked if I'd be attending an interspecies seminar on endurance management. I told him I just cooked in bulk. He didn't believe me. At this point, I stopped correcting people. Not because it was easier, but because the truth was simpler than the explanation. I lived with 2 Vulpine refugees because I fed one when she was hungry. That was it. Everything else was noise. One evening, the mother admitted she'd expected resistance. Humans were supposed to be territorial, according to the data. Protective of space, wary of obligation. I told her we were all of those things. We just prioritized discomfort differently. We'd rather be uncomfortable together than comfortable alone when someone else was suffering. She considered that for a long time, then said that was why humans caused so many cultural recalibrations. We didn't conquer. We complicated. We made simple systems stop working because we refused to behave predictably. The daughter asked if she and her mother were a complication. I told her no. They were just loud variables. She laughed and said she'd never been called loud before. Her mother said she had, repeatedly, just not by humans. We ate together that night, no commentary, no analysis, just food and conversation that didn't carry extra meaning. Or maybe it did, and we were all finally comfortable enough to ignore it. Weeks passed. Their situation improved. Paperwork processed. Resources allocated. The mother started spending more time outside the apartment, consulting, advising, doing whatever intimidating Vulpine elders did when they weren't evaluating human kitchens. The daughter found work nearby, something that let her rebuild without being watched constantly. She came home tired and satisfied in ways that had nothing to do with my cooking. I was relieved by that more than I expected. The night before they were scheduled to move out, the daughter lingered in the kitchen long after the dishes were done. She thanked me again, properly this time. Not for the food. For not making it a transaction. She said most species fed with strings attached, even when they pretended otherwise. Humans fed and then pretended nothing had happened. I told her we noticed. We just didn't think it needed to be announced. She smiled and said that was the most dangerous part. The mother stood in the doorway, listening. She said the contract would be closed the next day. Obligations fulfilled. Stability achieved. She said I'd performed well. I told her that sounded like a review. She said it was, and that humans consistently exceeded expectations by refusing to aim for them. Before she left, she added that if I ever fed another starving refugee, I should be aware of the potential consequences. I told her I already was. She paused, then laughed, a sharp, genuine sound, and said that awareness wouldn't stop me. She was right. When the apartment finally quieted, it felt strange. Too clean. Too orderly. I made soup out of habit, then realized I'd cooked enough for 3. I packed the leftovers and dropped them off at the transit hub on my way to work. A different refugee accepted them, eyes wary, hands shaking. I told them it was just food. They didn't believe me. That was fine. I knew how this story usually went. Humans keep feeding people. The galaxy keeps misunderstanding why. And somehow, between the double meanings and the awkward compliments and the accidental contracts, that keeps being enough to change things. The starving Vulpine refugee I fed came back days later with her mom. Now they both live with me, HFY.